Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Holly and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to throw. So let's go ahead and get started. So first thing you're going to need is a pottery wheel. You can end up buying one or you can end up going to a studio and renting one. There are a lot of studios all over the world that usually do lessons or things like that, but it is always nice to kind of see a video of somebody doing it beforehand. Everyone throws a little bit differently. The basics of what you'll need is a bucket of water, could be any sort of bowl. You will use kind of a lot of water. So what I use for my tools, you always need a sponge. This is a must. If you don't have one, go get one. I use this wooden tool, helps kind of shape things at the end. This is a needle tool. I'll show you guys how to use that later. And then lastly, this wire tool. You will definitely need the wire. That is necessity. The top of my wheel has what we call a bat on it. It actually comes off. You don't need this. However, I use this. It makes it easier so that way when you're done with your piece, you can just kind of pick it up and move it rather than having to pick up the wet piece of clay. So go ahead and get that nice and snug. And lastly, we'll grab our clay. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we put the clay on our wheel, we want to make sure that this is pretty dry. If it's not, go ahead and wring out your sponge and just go ahead and kind of absorb up any of that lingering water there if you have a freshly cleaned bat or just got washed. So we're gonna take a lump of clay. When you first start, I suggest with using a piece the size of your hand, unless you have absolutely huge hands. Then use one a little bit smaller. I'd say about 1 pound is good, maybe 1.5 pounds, a little too small. It's difficult to learn what you're doing, a little too big, and it's gonna push you around a little bit more before you get comfortable with it. So while this is dry, we'll go ahead and slap that down. And then we'll go ahead and grab some water out of our bucket and we're just gonna go ahead and soak this. Once it's stuck, you can go ahead and add as much water as you want. Down next to the wheel will end up being the foot pedal. This is going to control the speed. If you are right-handed, typically you will spin your wheel counterclockwise. And if you are left-handed, you'll spin it clockwise. This is really gonna dictate what hand goes on top in the first step here. So I'm right-handed, so my wheel is going counterclockwise. However, like I said, everyone does this a little bit differently. So if you find that doing it the way that I'm telling you doesn't work, go ahead and try what feels right. Go ahead and get started. The first step is called getting centered. Basically, this is a pretty lumpy piece of clay, and so we want to go ahead and get this nice and even before we can kind of start working with it. So how we're going to do this is we're going to put our right hand on the top, our left hand on the side, and if you're left-handed, you're going to put your right hand on the top, left hand on the side. Notice how close my body is to my wheel. We want to make sure we can keep our elbows into our body and either resting on our knees or into our hips so we have some sort of stability there, because it's going to be a bit hard at first. You're going to push a lot more than you think you're going to if this is your first time. So I'm going to put my right hand down, my left hand on the side, and what I'm doing is I'm pushing equally down and in. And you want your clay to look something like this. Now, this is what we would call centered. However, if you feel like it's a bit lumpy, you're feeling like a bump or something, sometimes air bubbles can get stuck inside of here. So there's a method to getting this out, and it's called coning. So where we squeeze our hands together, bring up the clay a little bit. And what this does is this works any air that we might have trapped in there, which sometimes just happens from when you stick your piece of clay onto the bat itself. It'll just pocket a little bit. So just go ahead and bring it up. You're not trying to get it centered when it's up here. You're just trying to bring it up so that way when we push back down, most of the air bubbles will rise through the top and it will get rid of it. A lot of the times you'll hear or feel like a little pop. And so that can sometimes help you. So once we get back down to centered, we can go ahead and open up our pot. Now, you guys are probably wondering, what does centered look like? What does it mean? If I can put my finger on the side here like this, and it's not bumping me every single time, you're centered. If it feels like it's doing this, the thing about it is you can choose to ignore that, or if you choose not to, this is basically your foundation of your pot. If you leave a little bit of a wobble here, when it gets here, it's gonna be a lot worse. So it's better to take care of it now while it's down there than to let it get any bigger. So we're gonna go ahead and open up our pot. Now we wanna kind of figure out how far down to go. So there's a couple of different methods to figuring out how far we wanna open this up. Plates are the only thing that's different. I will make a different video on plates later. But if you're right-handed, you're gonna open this up with your right index finger. And if you're left-handed, you will do your left. However, we want to make sure we don't go all the way down to the bottom. So the best way to kind of figure this out is you want it to be about, you know, 3/8 of an inch at the bottom, 1/4 of an inch, or about the size of the width of your finger. So what I'm going to do is, since I'm right-handed, I'm going to open up with my right index finger. I'm going to place my left finger next to it like this. I'm going to clean off my right finger here. Place my right finger on top of my left, perpendicular to my pot, and I'm just going to graze up against the side here. So it leaves a nice little mark like that. So I know when I stick my finger in all the way down to this mark right here, the pot is going to be exactly the width of my finger at the bottom. Kind of works. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead straight for our middle. Once we poke our hole, I got it right up to that line there. But if you find that you're like, I don't trust my judgment, or, you know, my finger on this, you know, fingers might be a little bit bigger, larger, or smaller or larger, depending on like who the person is, we can always go ahead and stop our wheel, and we can use our needle tool to actually get a visual measurement. So what we're gonna do is, after we open this, make sure to stop your wheel during this, drop your needle down, you're going to run your finger all the way down to the bottom, and you're gonna grab it right where it meets the bottom. You're gonna pull it up, and you can see that's my bottom, about exactly the width of my finger, so that worked out. Don't worry about the hole, it'll get closed up immediately. So once we have our hole there, we can go ahead and open this up. This is the one step I want you to do with one hand. If you start to hold this sideways and pull this out, what's gonna happen is this hand's gonna hold it in, this hand's gonna hold it out, and it's just gonna S-shape till it breaks. So do this with one hand, please. If you find that you're starting to end up with a little bit of a divot, any sort of thing like that, once you end up opening this up, you can go ahead and, if you kind of see, let me stop this for a second so I can show you. I have a little bit of a divot there. That happens natural. Go ahead and take your sponge, and we'll just flatten that out now. Just while the bottom is like right in front of us, because once we start to build up those walls, it's just gonna be harder to get down here. So it's gonna be a lot easier to do this now. Now, you also want to keep in mind, however wide you open this is going to be the base of your pot. It's going to end up staying about the same, give or take like an inch. Yeah, you kind of want to think roughly about what you're making. So once we are here and everything seems to be good, we'll go ahead and start to pull. So if you're right-handed, you'll be on the right side. It's going to feel really natural for you to stick your dominant hand on the inside. The reason that we don't want this, when I was explaining about the rotations earlier, was if we're right-handed and it's going counterclockwise, if we're on the right side, you can see that the wheel's spinning through our hands and away from us. So in this process, what we're doing is we're grabbing the clay and we're lifting it. However, people tend to slip in this step. It's not very easy to hold on to something that's moving and keeping your hands steady. So a lot of times people will slip. Now, if we're on the right side, our hands will slip off. So you don't want to end up slipping into the side of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our left hand on the inside, our right hand on the outside, and we're just going to pinch and lift. By now, you've put so much water into this thing that it's going to be a lot easier to move than it was when you were centered. So be careful about how hard you press on this. Now, you also want to make sure that your fingers are on the same point of contact. So you'll see that I kind of grab a little bit at the bottom. It's literally called pulling because you're just pulling the clay up. You're not pushing. So it feels like you're just staying still on one side. Not the best. Now, you'll see once I get up to the top here, my fingers are on the exact same spot. See that? They meet. So if you decide to use your hand or any other thing, some people like to use a sponge. You just want to make sure that whatever you're pushing on the inside and pushing on the outside, that they are connected at the same point of pressure. You don't want to be touching different pieces, because if you think of this in terms of rotation, right? You think of like how you spin a record. You put the needle on one side and the rotation does the rest. It's kind of the same thing with this. The only thing that you want to make sure about is that you're going slow enough that you are touching all the clay, because if you go too fast, it doesn't have time to fully rotate through your fingers, and then you end up pulling some clay up and the other half stays short. So you also notice it's going to want to flare out a little bit. If that happens, go ahead and just bring that in. You always want to go up first. The only exception to this, again, is plates. Always go up before you go out. Sometimes you pull some stuff off. That's okay. If anything comes off, just let it sit in your splash pan. Bring that in a little bit. Now, usually I'll do this like 6 or 7 times, or however long it takes you to get the bottom and the top of even thickness all the way through. So by this, I mean that your entire wall should be about 3/8 of an inch. Kind of about how a little bit wider, not wider, but a little bit thicker than what I would say for your base. This also is completely dependent on what you prefer. So if you like a heftier mug and you want to make some mugs, think about that. Maybe leave a little bit of extra clay in there. Maybe just do one less pull than you think. Leave a little bit of heft there. I think this should be about my last pull here. So once we get here, sometimes I like to clean off this bottom, and that's what I'll use this wooden tool for. So sometimes I'll just kind of take off this extra so we can kind of see what we're working with a little bit more. So now we get to the fun part where we get to decide what it's gonna be. So if we want this to be more of like a cup or like a mug, we can go ahead and kind of curl in our hands. This is called coloring. You can also start from the bottom here. Really start short and then work your way up. You never want to do anything too fast or too aggressively. You always kind of want to do subtle motions at a time. And if you want this to be more of a bowl, you can go ahead and just flare this out. And you can really just kind of mess with this as much as you want. Be careful when you start to go a little bit wider though, because if you do end up going too wide, sometimes it just doesn't end up coming back. It won't retract. Like a ramen bowl type shape to it. I'm good with that. I'll use this guy again. I might actually use the other side to get underneath here. This is totally optional, not necessary, but I like to use it as a nice little cleanup tool. It really does kind of help. You can use these wooden tools. The cool thing about clay is you can really use any sort of clay tool, including like these wooden ones. You might see these in like with like a little, what they call like a rib. You can use these at just about any shape or angle. So household items sometimes works really great for clay if you have any weird shaped things that you're not really sure what to do with. But I'll show you guys how to trim these later, so you don't have to get the bottom perfectly to where you want it right now. Totally not necessary. But if you do decide that you want to keep going with it, go right ahead. Now, you'll also notice that my top is starting to get a little wobbly. Another thing that you can do is use this needle tool to kind of level this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in from the side. I'm just going to slowly push my needle through. And you'll see, it'll just peel right off. So we'll just drop that in the slash pan, clean up our rim again. Now, you also want to make sure you use your sponge to get all your water out. Inevitably, you will end up with a bit of a puddle in here, so please get all your water out. And that'll really help, because if you leave too much water in there, what'll happen is the top will dry fast and the bottom, and it's going to want to crack. Once we are done, we'll go ahead and stop. We'll find this wire tool. This is just for the end. If this is a bit too long, go ahead and just grab and wrap your hands around. Just make sure you have a good finger or thumb on this, because if you give this any sort of slack, it's just going to cut right through. You're going to push this down on the bottom of your bat. You're going to cut through it. Might move a little bit, that's fine. And then I can pick this up and move this over. And then if I end up with another piece, I can go ahead and put another bat down, and then we'll start all over again. All right, guys. Well, I hope that that was helpful in your journey to learning how to throw, whether you just started or you've been working on it for a while and just kind of wanted to see somebody else do it. I will have a bunch more tutorials and things like that that I will be doing in the future. But if you like the video, go ahead and hit like, subscribe. I do really appreciate it. And if you want to see some finished pieces or any of my work, I do go by HollyAnnArtworks.com or on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that good stuff. So thanks for joining me.